Hello and welcome to the Value of Others Part 7. Today we start Chapter 4. Everyone is trying to negotiate their best possible offer. Marketplaces are fascinating. One fundamental feature of a marketplace is that it incentivizes the production of value, and this value is generally produced by transmuting self-interest into pro-social behavior. In a marketplace, actors typically learn that the best way to get their needs and desires met is to fulfill the needs and desires of others. As a consequence, most people spend a significant amount of their lives serving others as an indirect but reliable means of serving themselves. Self-interest is the primary driver of mutuality. Consider the commercial marketplace. If somehow, overnight, every person on the planet suddenly possessed enough money to purchase everything they wanted or needed, that currency would instantly inflate into worthlessness, and the world would start to fall apart in a matter of days, if not hours. Most people are only motivated to work because they believe they don't yet have enough money to stop working. That is, they believe they don't yet have the means to provide for their wants and needs indefinitely. By a continuous process of value adjustments, the marketplace intentionally prevents the vast majority of people from ever arriving at this point. And while this might disappoint and frustrate the individual, it is absolutely essential for the community, which has come to depend on the pro-social behavior of transmuted self-interest for its survival. However, it would be wrong to argue that the marketplace sacrifices the individual for the sake of the community, just as the community is improved as a result of the collective pro-social behavior. The constituent individuals are improved as a result of the transmutation and their self-interest. This is because marketplaces don't have illusions about human nature. They understand that people are inherently self-interested and tend to prioritize pleasure, comfort, and convenience over difficulty, discomfort, and growth. Consider how people spend their free time. When they're not working, they could be volunteering at orphanages, friends' childcare, feeding the hungry, or really serving others in any way whatsoever. But what do they do instead? They euthanize themselves in 100 different ways under the name of relaxation, and attend to their own pleasure. If most people did this indefinitely, the result could not possibly be a healthy and thriving community, because its constituent parts would be sickly and disordered. People are not altruistic. Some have the capacity for altruism at what times, but it would be foolish to believe that most people are altruistic most of the time. And because people are not altruistic, they need to be motivated to be pro-social. In the commercial marketplace, people are so motivated by a social fiction called money. Money has no intrinsic value. It is just a piece of paper, or, increasingly, some ones and zeros. However, I pretend to believe it has value because you pretend to believe it has value because I pretend to believe it does. Over time, we generally forget that we are pretending. The upshot is that once this social fiction becomes established, you can just tell people they are working for something called money, and they will spend all day helping other people. Of course, once a society establishes a currency, the individuals who live in it will want as much of it as they can lay their hands on. In this way, ambitious individuals can be guided to assume more dangerous or unpleasant or difficult or complex roles in the network of pro-social behavior with the promise of more of that value. This not only benefits the larger community, but, more to the point, the individuals in question as well. This is because these people must become increasingly courageous, competent, disciplined, and responsible to acquire that value, despite, or rather, hap- because of the frustration of their tendencies toward pleasure, comfort, and convenience. These individuals are generally healthier, happier, and more fulfilled than they otherwise would be. In, in pursuing their own self interest, they are forced to better themselves and serve their communities, and the world is made a more desirable place to live as a consequence of this effort. Contrary to popular belief, the necessity of work is not a tragedy. Rather, the tragedy would occur if work were no longer necessary. That said, marketplaces are not utopias. Their actual practice will always deviate, sometimes significantly, from their ideal operation. Every marketplace contains fraud, deceit, corruption, and exploitation. If not as actualities, then at least as continually threatened potentials. And every marketplace inevitably nurtures bias and error, since inherent value, if such a thing exists, cannot be objectively measured, and transacted values must be negotiated within unequal power dynamics. However, despite these flaws and liabilities, I still maintain that marketplaces are net positives, both for individuals and their communities. And why did I make this long-winded detour into the commercial marketplace? Hopefully, because it provided some necessary context within which to better examine the sexual marketplace and the transactions that occur within it. That's because the essential features of a marketplace don't change as a consequence of the kinds of value being transacted. At the highest levels, the principles that govern the commercial marketplace remain just as true when applied to the sexual marketplace. And since people are far more cognizant of the commercial marketplace than the sexual marketplace, I often use the former to explain the latter. Let's take a closer look. A virtuous necessity. As we've discussed, people want things from other people, and relationships are the media in which value is transacted. A sexual relationship is one in which one of the goods being exchanged is sex, and these relationships are transacted in the sexual marketplace. In this space, actors typically learn that the best way to get their needs and desires met is to fulfill the needs and desires of others. They do this by exchanging unequal goods of comparable value in a negotiated transaction that begins the moment the actors begin to interact with each other. In the beginning, most actors attempt to negotiate a transaction by offering what they themselves would want. This is typically due to a lack of understanding or a failure in perspective taking. Unsurprisingly, this strategy rarely is successful, for what should be obvious reasons. Successful negotiators don't offer what they want, but what the other party wants. What they want is what someone else has. And if someone else already has it, why would this someone else want it? Remember, to want means to lack. Instead, negotiators achieve success by offering something they have that the other party wants. In this way, actors learn to indirectly get their wants and needs met by satisfying the wants and needs of others. Self-interest is transmuted into pro-social behavior. If somehow, overnight, every person on the planet was suddenly if somehow, overnight, every person on the planet were suddenly and completely and indefinitely satisfied with respect to their sexual needs and desires, the value of sexual opportunity would instantly inflate into worthlessness, and the world would begin to look like a very different place. Society wouldn't collapse as quickly as it would under the hyperinflation of money, but it would experience a gradual and irreversible decline. Men typically catch a glimpse of what that world might look like immediately following orgasm. In that instant of sexual satisfaction, in the first moments of the refractory period, the value of sexual opportunity functionally falls to zero. And it's in that time that men can experience a radical re-evaluation of both their sexual relationships and their behavioral priorities. The The physiological delta that occurs across this time period reveals the extent to which ostensibly non-sexual attitudes and behaviors are actually cultivated for the purpose of satisfying sexual needs and desires. Because we live in communities with laws and social norms, people can't give full rein to their sexual appetites. Acting in this way would result in the imprisonment, expulsion, and execution of the individual. However, these appetites don't disappear just because they are socially prescribed. Instead, they are channeled, or sublimated, into behavior that on the surface appears prosocial and non-sexual, but is, in fact, inexorably linked to sexual ends. The complete and indefinite satisfaction of sexual desire would not simply lead to the end of sexual relationships. It would lead to the end of all sublimated prosocial activity as well. What the heck's going on with my hair today? It looks crazy. I washed it last night. Maybe I shouldn't wash my hair. It's just curly madness. By a continuous process of value adjustments which are rooted in biological mechanisms at least as much as in cultural forces, the sexual marketplace intentionally prevents the vast majority of people from ever arriving at this point. And while this might disappoint and frustrate the individual, it is absolutely essential for the community, which has come to depend on the sublimated prosocial behavior of transmuted sexual self-interest for its survival. However, it would be wrong to argue that the sexual marketplace sacrifices the individual for the sake of the community, just as the community is improved as a result of the sublimated prosocial behavior, the constituent individuals are improved from the transmutation of their sexual self-interest. This is because the sexual marketplace does not harbor illusions about human nature. It understands that sexual desire, linked as it is with life itself, constitutes a deep existential drive. This drive cannot ever be fully satisfied with culture or reason, nor can it ever be fully constrained by vows, or taboos. It is older, much older than any of these. If nothing else, the sexual marketplace has consistently borne witness to the fact that people will apparently go to incredible lengths and will undertake a considerable amount of pain, discomfort, and inconvenience to cultivate the value with which to barter for more and more desirable sexual opportunity. The necessity of negotiating sexual opportunity is the fundamental driver of self-improvement. Individuals who, for whatever reason, enjoy seemingly limitless and effortless sexual optionality often become tyrannical, narcissistic, and entitled. That's me. The fact that they often choose not to grow themselves in dimensions they believe to be unconnected to that optionality is another indication of the extent to which self-improvement is rooted in the necessity of negotiating sexual opportunity. For instance, actors who can successfully transact in the sexual marketplace without being, say, kind or educated are much less likely to develop these attributes than those who cannot. Abundant sexual optionality, especially if acquired precautiously. I can't. I need to get a dictionary alongside this. This guy has got some vocabulary. Is often a long-term liability for the individuals who enjoy it. On the other hand, individuals who, for whatever reason, despair of ever negotiating a successful sexual transaction often become hopeless, frustrated, and depressed. Their physical and mental health deteriorates considerably. They can even stop investing in themselves altogether because they believe they do not have nor could ever have anything of value with which to barter for a sexual relationship. Obviously, neither of these options is desirable. And that's fortunate because, for better or worse, the vast majority of humanity is somewhere between these two extremes, whether we like it or not. Most of us are forced to negotiate for sexual opportunity, but we typically do so hopefully, and this hopeful necessity is what incentivizes the production of all kinds of value, despite, or rather because of, the frustration of their immediate sexual wants and needs. These individuals are motivated to engage in sublimated prosocial behavior and are generally more attractive, accomplished, and resourceful than they would otherwise be. After all, it's the sexual marketplace that affords individuals the inestimable opportunity to become captains, who, in turn, generally improve the overall quality of life of passengers. Contrary to popular belief, the necessity of negotiating sexual opportunity is not a strategy. Rather, the strategy would occur if the negotiation were no longer necessary. That said, sexual marketplaces are not utopias. Every such marketplace contains fraud, deceit, theft, corruption, and threatened potentials. And every such marketplace inevitably nurtures bias and error, since inherent sexual marketplace value, if such a thing exists, cannot be objectively measured, and transacted sexual marketplace values must be negotiated within unequal power dynamics. However, despite these flaws and liabilities, I still maintain that sexual marketplaces are a net positive, both for individuals and their relationships, since most of us are neither willing nor able to completely dispense with the necessity of negotiating sexual opportunity. Let's spend some time examining the principles and processes that govern that negotiation. Since we can't not play, we might as well learn the rules so we can make our best showing. Over the next few chapters, we'll start by taking a bird's eye view on the entire dock and gradually work our way down to examining the moment-to-moment interactions between two actively negotiating individuals. Readers might balk. It's probably pronounced bulk. Readers might balk that they've never haggled for a sexual relationship in their lives. My rebuttal would be that they've never consciously haggled for a sexual relationship in their lives. The fact that they may not have been cognizant of the negotiation process is not enough to defute the existence of that process. Just like you're not conscious of your breathing 99% of your life, definitely, most certainly doesn't mean you're not breathing. That's my own input of that one sentence. An absence of evidence is not evidence of an absence. As usual, we must look at what people do, as opposed to what they say, think, and feel, in order to approach the truth. If awareness were a necessary precondition of action, then the world would look like a very different place indeed. Now, I left this little cigar out on the table. Did I find it on the table or on the floor this morning? I lost it like a while ago one evening when it was kind of dark, so I couldn't find it. So it's obviously been left out to get relatively damp, and it kind of expanded and become soft. And I left it in the sun for a little bit this morning. It hasn't fully dried out, so it's an interesting smoke. A fundamental tension. Like in any other marketplace, at any given moment, everyone is trying to negotiate the best possible offer with their best available option down at the docks. No one is interested in paying more for any given option when it can be bought for less, regardless of its desirability. Everyone will choose the most desirable option among goods of comparable value, regardless of the cost. And if individuals can acquire a comparable good more cheaply, more easily, and more safely somewhere else, then what they will pursue that alternative. All of these are rational. It's not possible to argue against them. They are axiomatically true, and they all profoundly influence what happens when people begin to interact with each other in the sexual marketplace. These statements all derive their truth from two essential features of any true marketplace: antagonism and competition. Features of any true marketplace: antagonism and competition. No one could buy anything if no one was selling, and no one could choose the most desirable option if there weren't any options. We need both antagonism and competition for negotiation to occur, at every scale and across all time points. To appreciate how antagonism operates in the sexual marketplace, let's first consider how it does so in the commercial marketplace. There will always be an irreducible antagonism between, say, management and labor. All other things being equal, management will always try to get as much productive effort out of labor as cheaply as possible, and labor will always try to get as much money out of management for the least amount of productive effort. The two sides need each other, but they're definitely not friends. This is because their goals are fundamentally opposed to one another. However, it's precisely this antagonism that creates the necessity for them to do business with each other. Now, in the sexual marketplace, there are two forms of antagonism: one based in marketplace role, and the other rooted in biological sex. Remember, marketplace roles are technically gender neutral, whereas biological sex, by definition, is not. This creates an opportunity for role sex interactions that, as we'll see, greatly affect the negotiation process. Excuse me, it's very warm and sunny, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to get sun on my skin. In the first place, a fundamental antagonism exists between marketplace roles, that is, between captains and passengers. All other things being equal, captains want to sell as many passengers on their ships as they can, for as much as they can, to passengers who won't cause any problems. Just consider how commercial airlines operate. They try to cram as many obedient travelers into their cabins as possible, typically overselling their flights to ensure capacity, for as much as they can get away with. On the other hand, passengers want to buy passages on ships for as little as they can, from captains who will treat them with as much consideration as possible. Just think about how you wish commercial airlines operated: cheap, direct flights with gourmet meal service and plenty of legroom. Of course, each convenience produced by the airline is an expense incurred by the carrier, which compromises the airline's overarching goal. On the other hand, if a carrier dispensed with these conveniences entirely, it would find it difficult to attract any paying customers, which would also affect its bottom line. The two sides need each other, but they're definitely not friends. This is because their goals are fundamentally opposed to one another. However, this is not the only tension that drives negotiation. In the sexual marketplace, a fundamental antagonism also exists between men and women, like the attractiveness ideals that serve as the standards against which normalized sexual marketplace value is measured. This antagonism is both culturally informed and biologically determined. All other things being equal, men want as much sexual opportunity for as few resources as possible. I lost my place. Let me start that sentence again. All other things being equal, men want as much sexual opportunity for as few resources as possible, and women want as many resources for as little sexual opportunity as possible. This is because men fundamentally trade resources for sexual opportunity, and women fundamentally trade sexual opportunity for resources. There are many reasons for this. Women are the gatekeepers of sex. They decide whether sex is transacted and with whom. However, this is mostly a cultural rather than a biological role. Women are endowed with this privilege because societies generally frown on using force or coercion to secure sex, and not because women themselves can unilaterally prevent unwanted or non consensual sexual experiences. The upshot is that women in society have been given a monopoly on sexual opportunity, a monopoly that is typically and understandably protected by society's most severe moral and legal prohibitions. Couple this with the reality that sex, with the potential consequences of pregnancy and childbirth, is inherently riskier for women than it is for men. Women's capacities to secure resources for themselves and their babies are, at the very least, comprised during late stage pregnancy and early stage postpartum in particular. As a result, women, or females more generally, tend to hedge their reproductive risk by mating with men, or males more generally, who seem capable of offering provision and demonstrate a willingness to do so. Because women have something in abundance that men do not, namely sexual opportunity. It is the most obvious good with which they can barter for something, at least historically, that men have in abundance that women do not, namely resources. I'm using this term very broadly to mean any transactable good besides sex, such as money, food, time, shelter, devotion, attention, affection, protection, childcare, excitement, emotional support, practical assistance, companionship, entertainment, opportunity, and commitment. A woman's sexual opportunity is the closest thing to money than actual currency, and it can be used to acquire pretty much any good or service, albeit in a generally much more indirect fashion. The only real difference between sexual opportunity and money is the marketplace in which each is accepted. This last resource demands special attention, whereas most or all of the other resources listed can be provided in other relationships, or all of the other resources listed can be provided in other relationships or by the woman herself. Commitment, at least in its ultimate form, marriage, can only be provided by a man in a sexual relationship. This is because men are the gatekeepers of commitment. They decide whether a commitment is transacted and with whom. And this is also mostly cultural. And this role is also mostly cultural. Sex occurs in nature, commitment typically does not. While sex can be non-consensual, commitment can never be, even if it is forced or coerced, which societies also understandably frown upon. It must be consented to. Commitment. I mean, yeah, well, there's you become committed because you're paid to be committed to an organization or a person, or potentially slavery is a form of committing to a master, which may not be quite consensual but forced. And this is why, even though nothing in either culture or biology prohibits men from offering sexual opportunities to women, or women from offering commitment opportunities to men, successful transactions in the sexual marketplace generally don't assume this form. As stated previously, naive negotiators begin by offering what they themselves want. Men mistakenly offer women sexual opportunity, which women already have in abundance, and women mistakenly offer men commitment opportunity, which men already have in abundance. This is why you almost never see men trading sexual opportunity for commitment, or women trading commitment for sexual opportunity, despite the fact that nothing should technically prevent such transactions from occurring. The economics just don't support these events. All things being equal, the more desirable her sexual opportunity, the more resources a woman can secure in the transaction. This is because people trade unequal goods for comparable value. However, value is an elusive and evolving thing, and the relative value of any good typically diminishes as it is acquired. For example, a poor man would likely work all week for another $1,000. However, a rich man probably wouldn't. The relative value of that $1,000 is significantly less to the rich man because he already has a lot of money. This is known as the law of marginal utility, and it's as valid in the sexual marketplace as in the commercial marketplace. It, at least partly, explains why a man is more likely than a woman to work overtime rather than catch an evening yoga class. Becoming slightly richer will be marginally more useful to the man, who will attempt to trade resources for sexual opportunity, and must compete with other men who will do the same, than to the woman. And becoming slightly more physically attractive will be marginally more useful to the woman, who will attempt to trade sexual opportunity for resources and must compete with other women who will do the same, than to the man. Money is valuable to everyone, but it is more valuable to men. This is because, in addition to all the other goods money can represent, e.g., security, freedom, convenience, money has one additional signification for men that it doesn't hold for women, namely reproductive optionality. Neither men nor women may be aware of these incentives, but people do not need to be conscious of incentives to be influenced by them. In the Western world, the marginal utility of resources in the sexual marketplace does more to account for absolute earning inequality between men and women than sexual discrimination does. And as we'll see, this idea also goes a long way toward explaining many of the current trends in the sexual marketplace, including the decline in sex, committed relationships, and marriage. But one thing at a time. And of course, the sun has now gone behind a huge grey cloud. One final word before we move on. As mentioned previously, marketplace roles interact with biological sex to create synergistic or antagonistic effects in the attraction phase of relationships. This is why male passengers and female captains tend not to fare as well in the sexual marketplace as female passengers and male captains do. There is a mismatch between the expectations of the role and the culturally informed, biologically determined attractiveness ideals. On some level, this makes the former pairings harder to see than the latter, which reduces the likelihood that male passengers and female captains will be selected for relationships. However, our recent examination into the antagonisms that lie at the heart of the negotiation phase of a relationship suggests another, at least partial, explanation for this phenomenon. If female captains want to trade sexual opportunity for resources because they're women, and they want to sell passage on their ships for as much as they can get away with because they're captains, then the vast majority of male passengers will be priced out of the transaction. They just won't be able to do business. This is because female captains sell passage for resources, and the marginal utility of those additional resources to female captains is so low that an extraordinary amount of resources would be necessary to make it worth their while. And if male passengers had the capacity to trade on that level, well, they probably wouldn't be passengers. This is why we don't see a lot of transactions between female captains and male passengers. The former typically decide that the marginal utility of the relatively insignificant addition of resources offered by the latter isn't worth the risk and cost of the transaction. On the other hand, it's much easier for male captains and female passengers to negotiate a transaction. Here's why. If male captains want to trade resources for sexual opportunity because they are men, and they want to sell passage on their ships for as much as they can get away with because they're captains, then female passengers who have a monopoly on sexual opportunity because they're women, can trade at a comparable valuation. This is because male captains sell passage for sexual opportunity, and the marginal utility of additional sexual opportunity for most men is so high that only a negligible amount of opportunity would be required to make it worth their while. In any case, there would be grounds for a negotiation. All other things being equal, the more desirable the ship, the more expensive the passage. But the more desirable the passenger, the less expensive the ticket. Specific male captains may not be able to negotiate successfully with specific female passengers, but the marketplace is full of transactions between these two classes of individuals. The economics make sense. From their first interaction, men and women start trying to suss out how expensive it would be to board a given ship or to take on a given passenger. This occurs in a myriad of ways, consciously and intentionally, and unconsciously and unintentionally. And if this weren't complicated enough, both parties are, on some level, aware that any given negotiation occurs in the context of the larger marketplace. So let's now turn our attention to that other feature of the sexual marketplace that gives rise to the necessity of negotiation: competition. So that is it for today, for this video. Thanks for tuning in to Cigar, Coffee, and Books, and Wisdom and stuff. Wisdom Share 777 at your service, reading you books full of good knowledge while smoking cigars and drinking some fucking black coffee. No milk today, I need to go pick up some milk, to be fair. Yeah, fucking let me know down in the comments below if you fucking like this shit. Like, comment, subscribe if you feel like it. If not, then fucking don't. Check out the description below where I'm going to actually link the videos from this guy. At the end of each chapter, here's a QR code which links you to a YouTube playlist of videos which relate to the discussion and the topics, amongst that in the text in that chapter. So I'm going to put the link below so you can look at the playlist from Orion Taraban's YouTube channel, which I believe is called Psychax. And I'm also going to put the link below for my Skulls and Bones business, where I sell animal skulls and bones. Not replicas, not plastic 3D printed garbage, fake stuff, real animal bones sourced from nature, from Wales, from England, from mountains, from woods. Yeah, don't leave your cigars out overnight to get moist in the dew. It's a bad idea. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in. Thank that guy. Have a blessed day. Peace out.